Let's look at watercolor paper. My favorite brand is Fabriano. It's the oldest paper company in the world, and I also like Arches. Let's look at weights. This first one is a thin weight paper, usually good for beginners, but it can give you some issues if you're not careful, like buckling, and give you some uneven washes. The next is 140 pound. This is Fabriano. It's a good weight for most paintings, though if you go a lot larger than about 15 by 20 or so, it will warp. So 300 pound is the last type of paper. It's great for larger paintings. Let's put a wash on the lightest weight paper. I already have one down. It's totally dry. I'm going to start with another. I'll load my brush with a color, and I'm working wet on dry to start with. I put a line down, and I'll give it a second to dry out just a little bit. This is what most beginners do, and then they try to stretch the wash across the page. And with cheap paper, you'll see that line as you put it down in the first place. It's really hard to drag it across and get an even wash all the way across. You'll end up with some marks right along that edge that you may or may not like. Sometimes this can create a streaky wash, especially if you're trying to do skies or large shapes that are nice and even. You'll also notice that the water makes the paper buckle. This can create some uneven spots later on. Lastly, with beginners, I also notice that they try to scrub back some of the lines that they don't like. And with cheaper paper, if you scrub too much into your paper, you'll pull up the paper pulp, and that'll make a big mess, especially with subsequent washes. All the other washes will then look really rough and uneven. Now let's try it on the 140 pound. This is what I use for most of my paintings. Again, unless I'm going on a larger scale. I'm loading my brush and I'm going to try the same wash. Putting a line down, waiting a second. Now typically with watercolors you want to work quickly, but most beginners, again, forget, and they work very slowly. So I'm going in with clean water. I'm going to pull this color across my page. The 140 pound paper gives me much more working time and flexibility because it can take more paint and more water, and it's a nicer quality paper overall. So even if I end up with a bit of a line or a hard edge, I can actually go back in and scrub a little bit more than on a thinner paper. Lastly, don't forget to clean up those edges and don't let your water or your color pool or you'll get some back runs. Sometimes it's a nice effect, but you want to be in control of that. Let's look back at that cheaper paper and you can see how it's buckled. Now let's look at the 300 pound paper. This is great for larger paintings. It's much sturdier than the other two types. I'm going to start with a wash again. And I'm going to take it to the edge of my paper, and you won't see any warping with this weight of paper. You'll also see that it has a really beautiful velvety texture as it spreads across the paper. You'll get some of that with the 140 pound, but it's really pronounced in the 300 pound. You'll also see that I can layer in more water and more color and keep working on the paper for a lot longer. So with the different weights of paper and qualities of paper, it's not a bad idea to start with cheaper paper, but just know what you're getting. And definitely work up to the more expensive paper because you'll be surprised with the results that you can get.